The brazier was dying. Its last coals whispered low in the belly of the brass bowl, casting a weak, flickering glow across the boy's face, too young for the weight of destiny, too old to pretend it won't come. His breath clouded in the chill of the desert night, the air thin and sharp as obsidian. Somewhere outside the canvas walls of the tent, a horse stomped once, shook its mane, and went still again. The camp slept, but the boy did not. Cyrus. His name had only recently begun to echo in whispers through the ranks, not as a child, not as a son, but as something rising. And yet tonight, under a sky scrawled with freezing stars, he lay awake like any child might, silent, sleepless, afraid. In his hand he clutched a carved obsidian seal, smooth and cold, etched with a lion's face that had belonged to his grandfather. A man whose crown was stolen, whose line was broken. A line now curling quietly in the veins of a boy with sand in his teeth and sweat on his brow. His eyes did not blink. They were fixed on the curve of shadow above him, where the tent seams bowed in the wind like ribs enclosing a heart that beat for war. He had never seen battle. Not yet. But the blood in him stirred with the rhythm of marching feet and war chants. He had learned not from lullabies, but from the stories of executioners, betrayals, assassins in the dark. His mother said it would pass, the fear, the burden. His tutor said nothing at all. That man, the eunuch who moved like silence itself, sat now in the corner of the tent, half hidden by folds of wool. His eyes, sharp as flint, watched the boy with the reverence of a priest before a sacred flame. His tongue had been taken years ago, carved out by a paranoid Median king for speaking a name at the wrong time. But his hands still taught, and his eyes still burned with memory. He approached now with the same soundlessness he always carried, knelt beside the bedding, and placed a clay cup of warm honey wine at the boy's side. Cyrus did not speak. Neither did the eunuch. But the boy's eyes flicked up, not in command, not in gratitude, but in understanding. Something unspoken passed between them. Something older than words. Outside, the wind shifted. The banners rose slightly from their poles, brushing against the air like wings ready to unfold. The sound of breathing, hundreds of sleeping soldiers, caravan guards, messengers, grooms, drifted across the sand. A makeshift city of tension and loyalty, built around the heartbeat of one lineage trying to be reborn. Tomorrow, the boy would ride. Not for ceremony. Not for sport. But eastward, toward the bones of memory, toward the foothills where Median treachery first cracked the spine of his family's rule. It was a journey not marked by maps but by bloodlines and betrayal. His father's murder had never been avenged. His grandfather's exile had never been undone. And now, like threads wound through a loom, all of it wove itself tighter and tighter into his chest. He sat up slowly, still holding the seal. In the dim light, his features looked almost too still, like a statue trying to remember it was alive. He rose from the bedding and crossed to the rack where his garments hung, rough wool, dyed deep red with madder root, stitched along the hem with the same symbol that sat cold in his palm. A lion, jaws open. A symbol that once stood for a kingdom. The eunuch watched without moving as the boy wrapped the belt around his waist, his father's belt, too large still, but fastened all the same. He could smell the leather. He could feel the iron buckle press against his ribs. And when he took up the scabbard, empty save for a training blade, he did so not with play, but with solemnity. The torch outside the tent guttered in the wind, one long blink, before steadying again. He walked toward the tent flap and paused. The air outside had turned colder, as if the earth itself were drawing in a breath before waking. He stepped out. The eunuch followed. Before them stretched the plain, lit faintly by moonlight and the dying embers of scattered fires. Horses shifted their weight, their breath rising in misty plumes. There were guards posted, but none stopped the boy. They had learned not to. Cyrus knelt in the sand. The seal still pressed to his chest. He reached down and touched his brow to the ground, not as a prince to his land, but as a servant to something larger than himself. His lips moved. The prayer was soft. Old Persian, barely remembered in the mouths of men, carried now in a boy's voice like the whisper of a reed in the wind. For the blood behind me, for the crown beneath the dust, for the fire that waits unseen. The words were not taught to him. He had taken them from memory, from dreams, from the haunted fragments of his mother's laments. When he rose, he looked older. Not in age, but in silence. The wind carried a faint cry of a bird, a hawk, perhaps, circling unseen. An omen, some would say. Others would forget it entirely. But the eunuch tilted his head toward the sound and watched the boy with a flicker of something close to awe. The boy turned, gave one last look toward the camp, and then toward the east, where the hills would soon catch fire with morning light. Somewhere in those hills lay his test. His history. His beginning. Behind him, the flame in the brazier dimmed to its final ember. Before him, the empire waited. Waiting not for a boy, but for the one who would become fire. The morning light came without ceremony. It crept over the horizon with the hush of something ancient returning, slow, deliberate, golden. The first thing it touched was the top of the unfinished ziggurat tower, still wrapped in scaffolds and prayer. Then the sandstone walls, still wet from the sweat of stonecutters. Then the open plain where dry grasses shimmered like dulled silver in the cold. And at last, it reached the man. Cyrus stood bareheaded before the rising sun. Dust clung to his beard, his boots, the folds of his robe. His shadow stretched behind him like a road not yet walked. There were no trumpets. No scribes recording the moment. Only wind. And silence. And a city still learning how to become. Pasargadae. Not yet a capital. Not yet a beacon. Still only bones and memory. Behind him, the courtiers began to gather, some hooded against the dawn, others too proud for cloaks. They spoke in different tongues, Elamite, Median, Babylonian, Aramaic. Their words formed no harmony, just echoes. But the man they followed spoke something older than language. A vision. One that could bend nations, or break them. The king's hands were cracked from work, not war. He had spent the previous day lifting stone, arguing with masons, kneeling beside a weaver's daughter to ask if the wool she spun was soft enough for the gods. He refused the throne that had been carved for him. Sat instead on a flat stone near the workers' fire. Ate from the same bread. To rule, he said, was to kneel first. This was not how kings were taught to behave. But Cyrus had never been taught. He had learned by exile, by the weight of a bloodline undone, by the silence that followed a lineage lost to murder and betrayal. He had risen not because the stars had willed it, but because he had looked up and demanded they remember him. And now he built. The temple foundations were drawn from ancient blueprints, etched into animal hide, passed down from hill priest to hill priest, smuggled out of burning cities and buried beneath the steps of ruined shrines. The cypress beams came from forests he had never seen. The stones from quarries where prisoners now sang songs of home. Everything, every piece, was pulled from the past and made to serve the future. This was not vanity. It was a reckoning. An old woman approached just after dawn. She carried a basket of figs wrapped in reed and a small carved idol whose nose had worn away from generations of hands. Her veil was dyed with saffron, but frayed. Her sandals had no straps. She did not speak the king's tongue. But she knelt before him, lowering her gifts to the sand. Cyrus stepped down from the stones, bent beside her, and pressed his fingers to the wooden idol, gently, reverently. Then he reached into his robe and placed a stamped silver coin beside the figs, a lion. Wings outstretched. His seal. The woman looked up once. Their eyes met. Then she turned and left, the hem of her robe dragging a long, crooked line through the dust. Behind him, the murmurs had begun again, priests whispering about ritual boundaries, generals muttering about the border with Lydia, scribes panicking over how to translate his gestures into proper protocol. But Cyrus ignored them. He stood once more before the rising frame of the city. Watched as a timber beam was hoisted by ropes, the rope creaking like a throat unsure if it should scream or sing. Stone, wood, labor, memory. But what he truly built was belief. Belief that men from distant tribes, who had once warred over cattle, over honor, over shade, could now serve the same fire. Eat from the same plate. Speak the same prayer. And belief, too, that justice did not come from bloodlines, but from the breath of the gods, echoed in men who chose not cruelty, but order. A scribal tablet near the foundations listed the first edict: all men shall be free to worship as their fathers did, and no tongue shall be made illegal. A second tablet, shattered in transport, was rumored to have said, let the mighty bow when they enter this city, for it is not power that lives here, but peace. The wind caught a scrap of linen as it blew through the scaffolds, a piece of a banner not yet dyed, fluttering like a ghost in the rising sun. In its motion, Cyrus saw something. A future, maybe. Or a warning. By midday, the city was alive. Potters set up in the outer quarter, kiln smoke rising in lazy spirals. Soldiers trained without shouting, wooden blades striking shields like heartbeats. A camel caravan arrived bearing salt and silk. Musicians from the hills played reed flutes in the square. The air smelled of ash and crushed time and something new, like the first scent after a storm. But beneath it all was still the unfinishedness of things, the sense that one spark could unravel everything. That night, he returned to his chamber. There was no throne. No gold. No drapery. Only a straw mat, a folded linen tunic, a basin of cold water, and a sword, placed with care across a cloth as white as bone. The blade was polished, untouched since the last campaign. It bore no blood, but the memory of it lingered in the grip. He sat beside it and lit a single oil lamp. Its flame stuttered for a moment, then held steady. Shadows danced across the walls, his own, joined by those of builders and priests, daughters and slaves, all stretched together into one tangled silhouette. He did not speak. He did not write. He only listened. To the creak of stone as it cooled. To the footsteps of a guard 3 tents away. To the sound of a woman humming in the distance, mourning or praying, sometimes they were the same. Tomorrow, he would speak with the Median emissary who still addressed him as usurper. Tomorrow, he would decide the fate of 2 prisoners who claimed the same piece of land. Tomorrow, he might weep, or kill, or forgive. But tonight, he sat with the fire. Let it breathe. Let it watch him. And in that breathless space between the flame and his silence, he remembered what had begun in exile, must now be carried in stone. For empires are not built with victories. They are built with restraint. With memory. With the courage to say, this will last. The torches bled gold across the marble. In the halls of Susa, heat rose like breath from the mouth of a dying god. Flames hissed within copper sconces. Silk rustled with each movement, like whispers in the dark. The night air was heavy with perfume, thick with saffron, rosewater, and the scent of men pretending they were not afraid. They came from every corner of the empire. Lydians, skin like bronze coins. Babylonians with oiled beards and eyes lined in kohl. Indians in tunics of indigo and gold. Greek mercenaries who bowed too low, and Persian nobles who bowed too little. All gathered beneath the vaults of Darius' great hall, a forest of stone, each column a prayer, each mosaic a warning. They offered gifts. They offered silence. They offered loyalty written in the currency of fear. But Darius did not move. He sat upon a throne carved from alabaster, lion-clawed, wide as judgment, flanked by immortal guards whose armor shimmered like water at twilight. His gaze was still. Not cold. But measured. The kind of stillness one sees in falcons before they dive. The kind of stillness that does not forget. He listened to a poem sung in a tongue he did not speak. He nodded to a tribute from Bactria, blue horses, trained to kneel. He drank once from a golden cup shaped like a ram's head, then set it down with a quiet clink, and said nothing more. Inside his chest, the weight of empire did not stir. It crushed. He had not been born to rule. He had taken it. Grasped it from chaos with both hands. Seized it from lies, blood, and the silence of cowards. He had made himself king of kings not through birthright, but through blade, through paper, through fire. And he had not stopped since. Now, he ruled over more than men. He ruled over memory. Behind the throne, the walls of the audience chamber bore the image of Darius, arms raised, feet firm, one boot pressing into the back of a fallen rebel. Above him, Ahura Mazda hovered, wings outstretched, as if blessing the conquest. But the king did not look at it. He never did. To look back too often is to invite the ghosts to follow. A eunuch approached. His footsteps were silent. His face unreadable. In his sleeve he carried the night's messages, small wax tablets, bound in leather, slick with sweat. He bent at the waist and whispered. News from the fringes, a fire in Sardis. A spy strangled in Bactria. A priest who questioned the order of heaven. Darius nodded. That was all. No words passed his lips. But his hand, resting on the throne, curled briefly into a fist, then opened, like the breath before judgment. Outside the hall, beyond the alabaster arches, men labored beneath moonlight. They hauled stone, hammered iron, traced the lines of a road that would stretch from the mountains of Asia to the cities of the Aegean. The Royal Road. A name not yet spoken, but dreamed. 1,500 miles of obedience. 1,500 miles of dust, of broken sandals, of horse sweat and torchlight. A path carved into the bones of tribes too slow to kneel. Progress, he called it. Unity, the priests said. But the soldiers knew better. They called it what it was, the spine of the empire. In the courtyard beyond the hall, slaves poured water over tiles to cool the air. Courtesans laughed too brightly at jokes they did not understand. A cat wandered beneath the table of a general who'd once burned an Elamite shrine and now received a garland of flowers. The city pulsed. Not with life, but with arrangement. Every gesture meant something. Every silence carried weight. Even the food was chosen for its message, lamb seasoned with date syrup, reminding the Lydians of Cyrus, rice soaked in saffron from Bactria, reminding the East of their place at the table. Nothing was offered that did not serve the crown. Nothing survived that refused it. In one corner of the feast, a satrap from the Caspian coast was weeping. Not loudly. Not shamefully. Just a single tear that traced the line of his cheek as he listened to a lute song from his homeland, played on a foreign instrument by a musician who had never seen the sea. The king did not acknowledge him. But he saw it. He always saw. The night burned on. Later, after the dancers had withdrawn, and the final torches dimmed to soft embers, Darius rose from the throne. His guards remained, statues in flesh and bronze. He passed through the inner doors of the palace without a word, moving like time itself, unhurried, inevitable. His private chamber was silent. No tapestries. No mirrors. Just stone, water, and a single writing tablet set beside a basin. Upon it lay the draft of a new edict, a decree that would shift the grain trade from Babylon to Susa, rerouting wealth through loyalty. He stared at the words, freshly scratched. Ink still glistening. He did not lift the stylus. Not yet. He stood before the small oil lamp and watched the flame. It flickered, long and slow. Not afraid, but uncertain. Like all flames, it waited for the hand that might extinguish it, or feed it more air. There had been days he dreamed of peace. But peace required trust. And trust had died with his brothers, one by poison, the other by blade. Peace was no longer a prize. It was a myth. A thing men used to comfort their children before sleep. Darius no longer slept. He thought of Persepolis, still only lines drawn in wax, shapes in a dream. A city not yet born, but already aching to exist. A city that would rise from fire and stone and stand as testament to a world made by will. His will. He turned back to the tablet. Pressed the seal. A lion's head, jaws open, wings raised. The wax cracked under pressure. Done. He walked to the window. The wind had shifted. He could smell something faint, not incense, not oil, but dust. Distant. Cold. The kind of scent that comes before change. The kind of scent that lingers after blood has dried. Far below, the streets of Susa glowed with lantern light. Merchants still bartered in hushed voices. Slaves still polished bronze. Somewhere, a child cried. And somewhere, deep in the earth, stones were already being laid. A foundation for something that would outlive them all. He whispered, not to the gods, but to the dark, let them see. Let them see what I am building. A torch dropped into oil. That was how it began. Not with a king's decree, nor the clash of noble armies, but with fire in the streets, a scream in the temple, and the sudden silence of a murdered magistrate. In the western cities, where Persian banners fluttered above Greek harbors, rebellion cracked the air like thunder far off at sea. Distant. But growing. In Miletus, the statue of Darius was pulled down by ropes tied to the legs of horses. Its head split on the stones, and the crowd cheered, not with joy, but with something older. Something hungrier. A kind of vengeance that didn't need a face. The Ionian revolt had begun. It was spring, but no one sowed grain. Fields lay waiting, untouched, as men sharpened blades in wine cellars and women smuggled messages hidden in bread. Old alliances stirred. Whispers traveled faster than horses. Aristagoras, once a satrap's puppet, now called himself a liberator. A man of polished words, velvet smiles, and hands that never once gripped a plow. He promised freedom. He promised unity. He promised that Darius, king of kings, was far away, and tired. But the truth was carved into every pillar of Persepolis: the king does not forget. In Sardis, the rebels lit the temples. Flames climbed high into the night, licking the carved faces of Lydian gods. Statues cracked, and the air filled with the smell of burning cedar, papyrus, blood. A Persian general fell from the city walls, his armor ringing like a broken bell. And somewhere in the chaos, a boy, no older than 12, clutched his mother's wrist as she whispered, "Don't look back." But he did. And he saw a soldier gut his father with a curved blade stolen from the palace guard. He would not speak for years. The cities, Ephesus, Clazomenae, Chios, all rose like teeth from the sea, each crying defiance, each waiting for the empire to flinch. But the empire did not flinch. It listened. Far to the east, in the cool silence of Susa, Darius stood beneath the map carved into stone. His fingers traced the lines of the Aegean. Small ports. Islands no larger than thumbprints. To others, they were distant provinces. But to Darius, they were arteries. And now, blood was seeping from them. He did not shout. He did not rage. Instead, he whispered to the empty hall, "Who are the Athenians?" It was not ignorance. It was memory sharpening. For they had sent ships. A token fleet. 20 triremes carved from the woods of Attica, painted with eyes at the prow. 20 foolish promises nailed to the mast. It was Athens who had dared, not just to speak against the empire, but to lend their hands to its enemies. And that, Darius would remember. His scribes recorded the moment with shaking hands. His general, Artaphernes, was sent west, not with a letter, but with fire. The core of the revolt cracked under the weight of Persia's wrath. Miletus was taken first. Slowly. Not with the scream of battle, but with the cold method of empire. They cut the aqueducts. They blocked the grain. They waited, until children drank brine and old men chewed leather. Then they came, not as warriors, but as executioners. The city fell in one night. And by morning, the ashes of its libraries were swept into the gutters, carried out to sea by rain. Not a single rebel was left unshackled. The survivors were chained at the neck, marched across burning earth, and sold beneath the gates of Susa. Some wept. Some prayed. A few spat. None escaped. Darius watched them from a shadowed balcony, his face unreadable. Below, the auctioneer's voice rang out in Elamite and Greek, announcing prices. Daughters. Sons. Philosophers. Clerks. All now accounted for in the ledgers of punishment. But the king's mind was elsewhere. It was not Miletus that haunted him. It was Athens. A city of thinkers. Arrogant. Curious. Dangerous. They had not merely insulted the empire, they had challenged the very order of heaven. To raise a sword against the King of Kings was not a rebellion. It was a blasphemy. And blasphemy must be answered with legacy. From that day forward, it is said, Darius did one thing each morning, he turned to a servant and said, "Remember the Athenians." Not for vengeance, but for architecture. In his heart, Darius was not merely a ruler. He was a builder of systems, a dreamer of roads that outlast dust, of laws that walk even when kings die. Athens had chosen chaos. He would answer with permanence. As the revolt withered and died beneath Persian spears, the empire turned its gaze westward. Ships were being built in Phoenician harbors, black-hulled and silent. Men were conscripted from the Zagros to the Nile. Not in rage, but in rhythm. For Darius knew, to punish a city, you burn its gates. But to bury a people, you erase their name from time. And yet, something stirred beneath the triumph. A quiet doubt, buried beneath the robes of prophecy. One priest, old, blind in one eye, came before the king with ash smeared on his brow. He did not kneel. He did not speak. He merely placed a single object at the king's feet, a child's wooden toy, half-burned. No words were exchanged. But in that silence, a question curled like smoke in the lungs: what grows from salted soil? Darius turned away. The time for softness had passed. Far across the wine-dark sea, in Athens, boys were training in the gymnasia. Laughing. Wrestling. Learning to die for a city that had not yet seen its own reflection in empire's mirror. Their hands gripped wooden swords. Their eyes gleamed with unearned certainty. They did not know what was coming. But the sea would carry it to them. And in the distance, beyond the haze, the coasts of Greece waited like the rim of a storm, still untouched, still dreaming, still unaware that vengeance had already set sail. A black sail tore against a violet sky. Lightning split the clouds, not above temples or palaces, but over open sea, where wooden beasts creaked beneath the weight of men and vengeance. The wind did not sing. It screamed. Salt bit the lips of soldiers too long at sea. Oars dipped and rose, like the heartbeat of an empire coming for its due. The first Persian expedition had begun. Darius did not come in person. Kings do not wade through mud when fire will suffice. He sent men instead, and ships, and the memory of a voice that whispered every morning, "Remember the Athenians." Now, the remembering had begun. From the Levantine coast to the black sands of Cyprus, shipwrights had worked by moonlight. Sawdust clung to their brows like ash. Phoenician harbors bled warships. From Sidon, from Tyre, from Arwad, they came, sleek and dark, like shadows pulled from oil. Each ship bore a name, carved in languages few remembered. Each man bore a silence, deeper than prayer. And at their head, Datis and Artaphernes, commanders chosen not for mercy, but for memory. They carried the king's will like a lantern through fog, lighting the way with fear and flame. Naxos fell first. No declaration. No ceremony. Just flame devouring timber, and soldiers dragging mothers from stone houses while children stared at the red reflection in their father's eyes. Smoke curled from the temples of Apollo. The gods did not speak. Delos was spared. Not out of mercy, but calculation. The island was sacred, too ancient to burn. The Persians made offerings. Datis himself laid garlands at the altar, then turned and muttered, "Let them know we remember the old ways, before we erase the new." Then came Eretria. They resisted. Briefly. For 6 days the defenders held, fighting from olive groves and broken walls, their feet caked in ash and blood. But betrayal always finds a door. It arrived in the form of 2 men, noble-born, who opened the city's gates before dawn, and knelt before the enemy with hands empty and eyes full of gold. Eretria was razed. Not punished. Erased. The population was chained, not slain, for Darius wanted witnesses. Slaves carried further than swords. Their stories would rot across Asia, whispered in corners, folded into myths. That was the Persian method, not just conquest, but curation. And still, Athens stood. Unburned. Untouched. Unaware, perhaps, of how close the tide had come. But before the spear could strike Attica, the sea itself rose in defiance. As the Persian fleet rounded Mount Athos, the heavens opened their jaws. A storm, sudden and wild, cracked down upon the armada. Thunder like war drums. Waves like black towers. Ships splintered against rocks sharpened by time. Men screamed in dialects drowned before gods remembered them. It was not just wind. It was omen. For days, wreckage washed ashore, planks painted in imperial red, shields twisted like leaves, sandals still holding the bones of what had once marched. Those who survived lit no fires. They whispered of Poseidon's wrath. Of Athenian sorcery. Of curses loosed by Delphic priests. But Darius, far away, did not flinch. The sea, he said, was a tool. Like famine. Like fear. Another expedition would come. This one was merely the opening breath, a wind sent to test the sails of destiny. Yet, in Athens, word of Eretria's fall spread like ink across white marble. Messengers arrived barefoot, eyes hollow, bearing only stories and the dust of burned cities. The assembly gathered. Torches flickered in the breeze, and for the first time, the people of Athens fell silent before the weight of consequence. Freedom, they realized, had drawn its sword. Themistocles, not yet a legend, only a man, spoke first. He did not shout. He simply asked, if they came for Eretria, why not for us? No one answered. Because the answer stood beyond the horizon, sails mending, warriors sharpening blades, a king already marking their names in stone. The Persian fire had touched Greece. But the flame had not yet consumed it. And as the coastline quieted once more, as the last of the Nautian smoke vanished into a sea-mist sky, a new kind of fear took root. Not fear of death. But fear that the next time the ships came, no storm would stop them. It began with a silence so complete, even the birds refused to fly. On the wide plains of Marathon, beneath a sky of cold iron and drifting ash, 10,000 men stood still, not because they lacked courage, but because they understood what stood across from them. The Persians had come. Not shadows anymore. Not smoke on the horizon. But flesh. Steel. Silk. Banners that gleamed like blood in sunlight. They did not chant, did not shout. They simply existed, in rows too perfect, too many, like the edge of the world had marched west. The Athenians watched from the high grass, breath shallow, backs tense. Farmers, potters, smiths, called not by kings, but by the trembling voice of liberty. No gods had promised them victory. No empire had armed them with chariots and gold. Only resolve. And the soil of their ancestors, still damp with myth. Marathon was not meant to be a battlefield. It was open and wild, a flat stage framed by hills and ocean. The Persians had chosen it well. Room to maneuver. Room to drown the Greeks in arrows and fire. But what Datis, commander of the Persian host, did not expect, was that the Athenians would charge. They did not wait. They did not flinch. They ran. Armor clattered like thunder. Shields beat against ribs like war drums. Dust rose beneath sandals worn by decades, not design. And in that charge, something broke. Not in the Greeks, but in history. For the first time, a free people met an empire with teeth bared, not knees bent. The Persian line faltered. Their archers loosed, too early. The arrows fell like black hail, but the Greeks closed the gap. The outer wings curved forward, surrounding the Persian flanks like a trap laid not with cunning, but with instinct. Blood soaked the sand. Screams echoed to the hills. And then, the clash. Iron against bronze. Flesh against destiny. No formation held long. It became chaos, and in that chaos, men became myth. Callimachus, the war archon, speared through the throat. Cynaegirus, grasping a Persian ship as it fled, losing his hand to an axe. Miltiades, watching it all, silent, knowing this moment would carve itself into marble. For hours, the killing did not stop. The sea turned red near the shore. The dead lay in rows, indistinguishable, until the wind shifted, and the scent of foreign oil on Persian robes revealed who had fallen first. And then, like a wave receding, the Persians fled. Retreating not with honor, but with desperation. Pushing each other onto ships. Wading into surf that did not forgive. Their dead numbered in the thousands. The Athenians had lost fewer than 200. But the cost was not counted in corpses. It was counted in silence. After the last Persian sail vanished, the Greeks did not cheer. They did not sing. They gathered their fallen, wrapped them in cloaks, and buried them beneath a single mound on the field. No names carved. No markers made. Just earth. And memory. Above it, an eagle circled. The sun began to set. In Athens, word arrived like thunder. A single runner, Phidippides, barefoot, bloodied, arrived just long enough to whisper, "We have won." Then fell dead. The city wept, but did not forget. For what had been defended was not just stone or soil. It was the idea of something new, that men could stand equal, not bent. That tyrants could be resisted, not obeyed. And elsewhere, across the sea, kings paused. Courtiers whispered. The world watched as the greatest empire it had ever known had been wounded, not by chariots or gods, but by farmers with spears. Darius, far in Susa, heard the news in fragments. His rage did not come in shouts. It came in silence. He stood before the fire altar, unmoving, eyes locked on a flame that seemed suddenly fragile. He called for another expedition. Bigger. Bloodier. But fate would intervene. Rebellion stirred in Egypt. Storms returned. And then, death. The king who had ruled half the world fell, and with him, the weight of vengeance passed to his son. Xerxes. And so, the wound of Marathon did not close. It festered, quietly, under silk robes and jeweled crowns. The Persians did not forget. Nor did the Greeks. Because Marathon had not ended the war. It had started it. Now, the question remained, what would Athens do with its breath of victory? Would it rest? Or sharpen its blades for what was coming next? Because beyond the Aegean, in the heart of empire, a young king looked west, not with hesitation, but with hunger. The sea was too quiet. As if it had been bribed to silence. And on its still surface, stretching from shore to shore, like a wound stitched by the hand of a mad god, stood the bridge. Two of them. Ropes of flax and papyrus, fastened to hundreds of ships lashed together by bronze, nailed with Persian iron, anchored to a command that defied the heavens themselves. This was the Hellespont. And crossing it, with robes of black and red, with a crown that glittered like sunfire and eyes that never blinked, came Xerxes. Son of Darius. Lord of Asia. King of kings. The world had bent to him since birth. No door was ever closed to him. No sentence denied. He did not inherit an empire, he embodied it. And yet, the shadow of a single word followed him wherever he went. Marathon. It whispered in his corridors. It hissed in his dreams. He remembered his father's silence after the loss. The smoldering anger, the bloodless stare toward the west. And when the old king died, Xerxes took that silence as a vow. He would finish what Darius had begun. But not with haste. No. Vengeance deserved precision. He summoned scribes, architects, generals. He counted not men, but nations. Not ships, but forests fell to build them. From India to Ethiopia, the world's corners were scraped clean of soldiers. Men who did not speak the same tongue were shackled to the same command, crush Greece. They came by the hundreds of thousands. Infantry. Cavalry. Archers with poisoned tips. Engineers who bent rivers. Priests who burned offerings by the ton. Even beasts, horses, camels, chariots scythed with bronze. It was not an army. It was a continent on the move. Some say 2 million marched with him. Others say less. But the truth lies not in number, it lies in the thunder of their feet. Earthquakes followed their camps. Rivers dried behind them. And still, Xerxes was not satisfied. When a storm shattered his first bridge across the Hellespont, he did not weep. He did not pray. He whipped the sea. 300 lashes. Chains thrown into the surf. Curses spat at Poseidon. A message, written not in ink, but in defiance. I am not afraid of gods, he said, only of being forgotten. And so the second bridge was built. Stronger. Colder. As if even nature knew resistance was now a form of suicide. And when the king stepped onto it, the sun broke through the clouds like a sword. He walked across the water. From Asia to Europe. From prophecy to wrath. Behind him, the greatest army the world had ever seen followed. The earth moaned beneath it. And ahead, in the parched hills of Attica, in the colonnaded silence of the Acropolis, Athens listened. Not with celebration, as they once had after Marathon. But with the hush of a city peering down the throat of its own extinction. They had won a battle. But they had woken a monster. The Athenian council met by torchlight now. Every conversation a whisper. Themistocles, brilliant, sharp, part wolf, part fire, urged preparation. Not walls. Not land armies. But ships. He knew Persia's breath would first reach them across the waves. The future would be decided on water. But Athens was divided. Some wanted to flee. Some wanted to kneel. Others, the old veterans of Marathon, simply stood in silence, staring out at the sea, as if trying to see their own deaths arriving early. The oracle at Delphi gave no comfort. When the Athenians begged her for wisdom, she answered only with this: flee to the ends of the earth. All is ruin. Only the wooden wall shall stand. Wooden wall. Most took it as a curse. But Themistocles saw it as a whisper. Not a wall of timber, but of ships. Triremes. Swift. Deadly. Rowed by free men who had something to lose. Athens poured its silver into shipyards. They carved their hope into planks and oars. Fathers taught sons how to grip a spear, not to fight on land, but to die at sea. Still, the shadow grew. Xerxes moved like time. Constant. Irresistible. His scouts lit signal fires that could be seen from the peaks of Mount Ossa to the shores of Macedonia. Cities burned before they had time to surrender. Others welcomed him with gifts, thinking it would spare them. It didn't. There were no allies in his path. Only delay, or obedience. And somewhere, high in the hills of Thermopylae, a narrow pass where cliffs meet sea, where land itself narrows like the throat of a dying man. A few warriors began to gather. They were not many. But they did not come to survive. They came to slow a god. That story would come soon. But for now, Athens braced itself. The black sails of Persia had not yet touched her harbors. But the scent of burning cedar was already in the air. And in the city's heart, amid broken statues and half-buried dreams, a single question echoed louder than any drum or trumpet: if this is the end of freedom, what does it sound like? And in the east, beyond the horizon, that sound began to rise. A drumbeat of war. A godless march. And the hollow thunder of ships moving toward destiny.